How we doing, folks? Your host Moose here on the Pitt Panthers Football Network as we welcome you to our Panther Nation Season 3 Week 9 recap show following your Panthers' 34-17 victory over the Virginia Cavaliers, capped off by a 218-yard rushing performance by senior running back Darren Hall. It was a great performance by him. Kenny Pickett also had a really nice game. 2 touchdown passes from the sophomore quarterback. He ran well in addition. Hall was unbelievable, just putting up yards left, right, and center. CJ London did a nice job spelling him as well. So overall, it was a really just solid game for the Panthers. And it was things that we talked about they needed to improve upon that they seemed to do. 3 interceptions. They did give up 320 passing yards, but that has to be owed partially to the fact that Virginia, once they fell behind, really just had to pass to try and get down the field. They discounted, threw away the rushing attack. They only had 14 carries compared to 50 passes. The Panthers were completely different. 16 passes compared to 48 rushing attempts. So when you get that lead, you can afford to run the ball and put away the other team by killing the clock. The other team, Virginia, of course, had to try and come from behind as best they could. Pickett was sacked 3 times today, so a little bit more than usual. Did have 2 touchdown passes, only about 106 yards on his 10 completions, but a nice game overall for Pickett. Darren Hall, of course, led the way, 218 yards rushing and a touchdown. He averaged almost 10 yards a carry, had 1 60-yard run, and then 3 runs of 20 yards or more. CJ London, not great in relief of Hall. He had 7 carries for 18 yards. He did have a touchdown, though, and the Panthers did have some nice success with the jet sweep. Maurice French did have a 30-yard carry that he busted off in the jet sweep type game. So nice game for the Panthers. Quadri Olson may be back next week against Notre Dame, and that'll really give them the variety they want. Maurice French, 75 yards through the air on 4 catches, so 19 yards a catch, including a 42-yard touchdown pass from Kenny Pickett. Or excuse me, not 42 yards. He had a 25-yard touchdown reception, a 42-yard play as well. So a really nice game there. Aaron Matthews, I mean, it's a little OP as far as the way that they score wide receiver blocking, but he had 9 pancakes from the wide receiver position. That's unbelievable. His impact blocking and his run blocking is ridiculous. For the Panthers, Salim Brightwell led the way in tackles. They did have a few no sacks on the day. Really didn't pressure the Virginia quarterback at all, but defensively through the air, a nice game. 3 interceptions. Hamlin had 2, Artis Scott had 1, and Dane Jackson had a deflection as well. Jay Bump missed a field goal. He doesn't do that often just because he doesn't have a particularly strong leg. So from 46, if you don't hit it entirely true, it may come up short, and that's what we ran into today. But Panthers did a nice job. Abramson, he throws for 326, but they still only put up 17 points. 1 touchdown on the day for Abramson. Of course, only 18 yards rushing. Even when they did hand it off to their halfback, Jordan Ellis, he had 13 yards on 8 carries, so they really could do nothing there. And the Panthers did a great job just shutting down this Virginia attack, limiting their opportunities as they moved down the field. And then late in the game, when Virginia was really heavily leaning on the pass, the Panthers pulled off some turnovers, were able to take the ball away and really just run down the clock and knock out the Cavaliers at Scott Stadium. So that improves Pitt to 6-1, 3-1 in conference, gives them a chance to really control their own destiny as far as the ACC Coastal Division is concerned. Georgia Tech beat North Carolina, who's looked really subpar. The Panthers have both of those teams coming up on the schedule. Miami was upset by unranked BYU, who's been very good this year. They're 7-2 now. They knock off number 12 Miami, who falls to 5-3. That pretty much takes them out of the playoff picture, but they could, of course, still win the ACC at this point. Notre Dame blows out Syracuse to stay unbeaten heading into their game of the week matchup with Pitt this week. Virginia Tech destroys Duke 42-6. So if the Panthers should stumble in the Coastal Division, that would be the Hokies who would stand to gain primarily. Clemson knocks off NC State, so NC State loses their first game of the season. They were previously unbeaten. Clemson brings them down behind a 5-touchdown performance from Kelly Bryant, and that means the Tigers are still at least in the hunt for the Atlantic Division title. It'd probably be a long shot for them to make the college football playoff, but they could at least potentially make the ACC championship. Florida State and Louisville, who they're going to have to catch. Florida State in the driver's seat now at 4-1, beating Louisville 42-35. Although technically NC State controls their own destiny still because they only have 1 loss as well, but they did beat Florida State. So we'll see how the ACC shakes out. Nebraska knocks off Wisconsin, so that puts them in the driver's seat in the Big Ten West, or whatever the divisions are called in the Big Ten. Ohio State, of course, in the driver's seat to take on Nebraska, but they have Penn State coming up on their schedule. Both of those teams with blowout victories. LSU, UCLA, all the big names come away with fairly easy wins. LSU's was a little tight against A&M, but otherwise Auburn an easy win. Of course, we saw Miami was upset. Oklahoma does stay unbeaten with a tight victory over Kansas State 38-31, led by big performances by Joe Mixon and Kyler Murray. Georgia beats UL Monroe 34-20. Cincinnati goes to 7-1, beating UConn. Notre Dame, of course, blows out Syracuse, so they go to 8-0 and are on track for an undefeated season that would put them in the playoff. Washington knocks off Arizona State 33-14. Texas with another blowout. When they win big. That's been made blatantly clear by the Longhorns as they beat TCU 42-7. Arkansas State 62-7 over winless Idaho. Colorado's been incredibly impressive this year. 49-35 victory over Arizona as they go to 7-1, do the Buffs, with UCLA coming up soon on their schedule. Players of the week for the Week 9, Shelton Lewis, the senior corner from FAU, 3 interceptions. Senior redshirt quarterback from Arkansas State, Justice Hansen, 5 touchdown, 214 passing, 128-yard rushing game. So 350 yards of total offense, 5 touchdowns in that blowout over Idaho. In the ACC, I think this is our first game of the week, or player of the week for Pitt. Damar Hamlin, 2 interceptions in the victory over UVA, gets Defensive Player of the Week. Kelly Bryant with 5 touchdowns in the victory over NC State gets Player of the Week on the offensive side of the ball. 185 yards passing, 58 yards rushing. Efficient, if nothing else, for the redshirt junior quarterback. In the Heisman race now, Deshaun Kaiser, fairly easy performance, 1 touchdown, about 300 yards in the victory over Syracuse. Easy day for him. Josh Rosen moves up the charts with a 4-touchdown, almost 400-yard performance in the victory over Oregon State. Darius Geis, the LSU senior running back, 152 yards and 2 touchdowns. Saquon Barkley had a touchdown and about 150 yards. He just hasn't got a ton of touches. You can see he got 20 touches in that game. And then Joe Mixon, 132 yards rushing, 87 yards receiving, and 2 touchdowns. Fantastic game for the redshirt senior running back as they beat Kansas State in that matchup. And they stay undefeated, so there's still 6 unbeatens remaining in the NCAA. Notre Dame, LSU, Washington, Ohio State, UCLA, and Oklahoma. And they're all, except for Washington and UCLA, they're all in separate conferences, which means we could end up with as many as 5 unbeatens by the end of the season here if all those teams win out. UCLA and Washington are, of course, going to have to play each other in Pac-12 play, so they could, one of them is going to have to lose at some point. But following that, Alabama and Georgia in the SEC ready to pounce. Alabama still has to play LSU this year, so that could be a big game there. Penn State still has to play Ohio State. Pitt and Stanford both have to play Notre Dame. So a lot of things can happen from now till the end of the season. And following this week's games, following the games of Week 11, or of Week 10, going into Week 11, we will have our first college football playoff rankings of the season, and we'll see how things shape out, especially with some big games coming this week, of course. Your Pitt Panthers sitting at 14 in the coaches poll right now, moving up from 15 after their victory over Virginia. Louisville and Wisconsin drop out with their losses, although Louisville only lost to Florida State by 7. Surprising they drop out of the polls, but what can you do? So we talked about ACC division things. Virginia Tech, Pitt, and Miami are really the 3 teams favored to potentially come away with the Coastal title. Pitt, if they win out, will win it. If Pitt loses and Virginia Tech and Miami win out, Virginia Tech will win it. If Virginia Tech and Pitt at least lose a game, then Miami could win out and get the title because they have a game against Pitt still to go. In the Atlantic Division, Florida State and NC State. NC State, if they win out, will win the Atlantic Division. If they lose once, Florida State can win out and win the division. If both of those teams lose at least one game, things can get very, very messy. So it's still wide open in the ACC. That's for sure. And if we look at the ACC matchups this week, some big conference games as Louisville has Syracuse, Duke has Virginia, Clemson and Wake Forest. And everybody else has a non-conference game the rest of the way. Big games this week. Number 3 Washington against number 13 Stanford. Herbstreit likes the Cardinal at home. taking on Washington, but that defense of Washington has been unbelievable. Number 3 rush defense, number 1 pass defense in the country, number 1 defense overall. I have to like the Huskies in that one. UGA against Florida. Herbstreit likes Florida, but they're, in spite of their 6-1 record, they just don't impress me overall, so I have to like Georgia in that one. And finally, the big matchup for your Panthers this week, heading to South Bend to take on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, undefeated, number 1 in the country. And when you look at this Notre Dame team, they are a juggernaut, okay? Number 7 passing offense, 300 yards a game, 505 yards and 41 points a game. They're unbelievable on offense. The Panthers, though, you have to say, their defense has been much improved. And so if their D can continue to play at the rate they have this season, then there's a chance the Panthers could stay in this game. They'll have to control the clock with the rushing attack, you'd have to think. Keep the Notre Dame offense off the field as much as possible to give themselves a chance to win. If we look at Notre Dame, they've played a tough schedule so far. They beat, if you look at their combined opponent record, it's not great, but the good teams they played are good. Texas they beat, who's been blowing out teams. Louisville, who actually beat the Panthers, they obliterated. Their weak games, they, of course, destroyed UMass, Purdue, and FCS squad. Easy wins there. They did beat Florida State 5-3 in a tight victory. They beat USC in a tight victory. Unbelievably, USC is 0-8, which is just wild. And then Syracuse, they beat easily last week, 42-16. So the one thing you can say is they maybe have come back down to earth a little bit. They've had a couple tight victories that they've escaped with. USC, they were actually down in the fourth quarter. I think it was 28-14. Kaiser led them back. So they're not invincible, but if there's going to be a game they slip up, it's either this Pitt matchup at home where they have to travel to Stanford for their last game of the season. So those are the two to watch out for. Of course, they're led by Deshaun Kaiser, almost 2,300 passing yards, 21 touchdowns, and only 1 interception. So he does not turn the ball over. He does not make mistakes. He's a very good passer of the ball. They've got Jones leading the way rushing-wise, averaging about 88 yards a game, and then Equanimous St. Brown with about 92 yards a game receiving, so very solid there. For the Panthers, of course, they're led by Kenny Pickett, 9 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. Not a ton of yardage, but he does seem to do a nice job of, completing the passes he should complete. He's about 67% on the season completion percentage, so he's been solid when they ask him to. Darren Hall, currently the Panthers' leading rusher, but they have 2 very solid players in Hall and Olesen. The big story is Quadri Olesen gonna play for the Panthers. If we look at that Notre Dame lineup, though, focusing on them, they're just unbelievable across the board. They're very highly rated. A lot of 90 pluses on this team. They got a 99 center, 99 quarterback, 97 halfback Williams, who's not even their leading rusher. He's been hurt most of the season, but he is probable to play, so we should expect Dexter Williams to be in the lineup. Jones is one of their leading receivers, 27 catches. They have a 95 kicker in Justin Yoon. Unbelievable cornerbacks in Watkins and Crawford, so you shouldn't expect the Panthers to be able to pass. Heck, their backup quarterback, if something were to happen to Kaiser, Brandon Wimbush, he's better than, ratings-wise at least, he's better than Kenny Pickett right now. So they have an unbelievable lineup. Jerry Tillery, defensive tackle, is an absolute monster in the middle. He's huge, 6'7", 315. Equanimous St. Brown we talked about. They have C.J. Sanders, their receivers that he can throw to. So many weapons that Deshaun Kaiser can utilize here as we look through their team. Their line is great. Rule, and they got Bonner. Like I said, it's all 90 pluses. It's unbelievable. Even their backups are 88, 89. 90 overall. So the depth on this Notre Dame team is fantastic, but the thing that we've seen from them is they do have a tendency to be up and down. They almost lost to a winless USC team. So if the Panthers can take advantage of that, hold their offense kind of in slow motion. Kaiser's not had some great performances lately. If they can slow him down at least to start off, keep in the game, maybe force him into a mistake or two, the Panthers could come away with a victory. And that's where it's going to come down to. Turnover battle will be huge for Pitt. If they can maintain the ball, take it away from Notre Dame maybe once or twice, then they should have a good chance of at least potentially pulling the upset. But Notre Dame, 5 receivers of 87 overall or greater. The Panthers don't have 1, which is unbelievable. You got Jones at a 97, Alize Jones. Unbelievable. 85 speed for a tight end, so a lot for the Panthers to watch out for there. If you look at the line for Notre Dame, just across the board, basically all 90s or 88s and above. So the Panthers will have to work really hard, be very creative in their schemes if they want to get some good pressure. Notre Dame's line is fantastic. You can see 92, 89 defensive tackles, 90-plus ends. At linebacker, they're very solid. Bilal's very good outside. They got Barajas in the middle. Right outside with Jeff Greenwood, the sophomore, maybe an area the Panthers can try to exploit if they run that direction. But then they got to get past the Notre Dame line. So it's going to be very, very tough. The Panthers are going to have to be creative in their play calling, Pickett will probably be under duress. They'll have to get him into space so that he can make some good throws, limit the opportunities of Notre Dame down the field as much as they can with those solid receivers, and just force Deshaun Kaiser to beat them is really the big thing they'll have to do. They'll have to see great coverage, and really it's going to be a tough task for the Panthers, no doubt about that. So let me know in the comments, guys, what you think of this Notre Dame team, what you think of the ACC battle, who should win the Heisman right now based on what you can see, who's going to win some of the other big games, Washington, Georgia, etc., and who's going to win this Pitt game. What's the final score going to be? Let me know what you guys think in the comments. So as always, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate all the feedback on every video. And as always, hail to Pitt, hashtag Panther Nation. Take care. We'll see you very soon. Pitt versus Notre Dame coming up soon. Take care. Bye-bye.